Starting. Welcome everybody. My name is Akira Yano. I use he, him, his pronouns. I work at Climate Generation as the Youth Campaigns Coordinator. And I'm excited to bring to you a panel of really awesome leaders in the Youth Environmental Activist Campaign Program. We're going to be answering some questions today. But first, I would like to take some time to recognize whose land we are on today. We're here at the Youth Climate Justice Summit, and we have youth from all over the nation this year as this event is virtual due to the pandemic. However, the Youth Climate Justice Summit is typically held in the state capital of so-called Minnesota. We recognize the First Nations of those whose ancestral and contemporary lands comprise the state, the Dakota, the Ho-Chunk, and the Anishinaabe. We acknowledge this because the effects of genocide and colonization shape the everyday experiences of Indigenous individuals and communities who are alive, resilient, and leading change, especially for climate justice in our world. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our wonderful moderator, Ava, and our panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Ava. She, her, hers. I'm an intern with YEA Networks program, and I'm going to be moderating. So, to start off, I'll just ask you all your name and pronouns, and
I can go. My name is Eleanor. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a senior at Minnetonka High School.
My name is Isabelle Wong. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a senior at Apple Valley High School, and I'm in the Yemen cohorts.
Hi, I'm Nayana Gurung. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm a senior at Henry Sibley High School, and I also do PSEO at the U of M. And yeah, I'm doing a campaign through YEA Climate.
awesome. So, how long have you been with the program?
I can answer this one first. So I first was introduced to Climate Gen as a whole through working with Minnesota Youth for Climate Justice, a different youth org. And then from there, so I guess that's been about a year, but then I first started working with Akira and YEA Networks as a whole, like beginning of this year. So about a semester, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to Isabelle. I also was a part of Minnesota Youth for Climate Justice, and we worked a lot with YEA Men. And from there, I joined the YEA Campaigns program, and we started this fall and have been working since then.
I first attended the Youth Climate Justice Summit my freshman year of high school in 2017. And 3 years later, here I am, and I've been doing a campaign since the beginning of this school year.
Okay, I'm going to keep asking the questions sort of one by one because I think we're good for time. So we'll just move on to why did you get involved with climate justice?
I personally got involved with climate justice after kind of learning more about what it actually was, because for a while I just kind of assumed that climate change was, the temperature going up, and that's all that it really was. But when I learned about things like environmental racism and ecofascism, I was super intrigued, and then I got more involved in climate justice work.
I was kind of the opposite of Nayana because since I have family overseas, I learned that Indonesia, their capital, Jakarta, is going to be sinking and they need to move their capital. So that was my first introduction to like the horrors of the climate crisis as a whole. And then from there, I was able to learn about local stuff and really narrow down my interests. Yeah.
For me, it really was about like kind of finding the way climate change related to my life too, because it was something I really cared about. But then thinking about, I kind of didn't let myself think too hard about it because it was so existential. But once I really did, and I realized the fact that I was going to be one of the people left behind because of like my disabilities, and that if something goes wrong and I don't have access to my meds, a hospital, etc., like that could be a very prevalent impact with climate change. And it made me realize that like, oh my god, like this isn't something I can just ignore. And that was just one extra added thing that I realized, and kind of forced me like to take action.
Hi, we're back. Had internet issues. So we were on the question, why did you get involved with climate justice? And I'm assuming that Nayana, you finished your answer while I was gone, or do you want to answer again and repeat it?
I think we're all ready for the next question.
Oh, awesome. All right then. What's an issue you're really passionate about?
I think that there's so many issues out there, so it's hard to choose. But especially in the climate movement, I've really found my calling in the disability relationship to climate justice, because like I said before, that was kind of like my eye-opening moment, was like, oh my god, like I can't just sit back and let other people handle this, because I'll be the person they forget. And so realizing that, then when I got involved in the climate change movement, I realized it wasn't even a place for disabled people, where we didn't have, like, it just wasn't a place where we could actively participate and get involved, nor were our issues ever discussed. So kind of finding that area and talking about it, and has been very like, it has been a passion of mine.
For me, it's also so hard for me to pick. But I guess like just as an umbrella thing, like anti-capitalism, in every form. So that includes climate justice stuff, but also racial justice and basically everything you can think of.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really interesting to me, something that I'm passionate about, since I feel like I'm in a place of privilege since I live in the suburbs, was environmental racism. Because as a person of color, I see a lot of people that are affected by it, that look like me, but then I am able to not experience that since I live in the suburbs. And I just think that it's unfair that people have to go through that. Yeah.
Okay. My internet cut out again, which is lovely. I'm assuming you finished talking and that we're ready for the next question. Okay, cool. I'm sure there was it seemed like, all right, whatever, lag. All right. What are some ways social justice relates to climate change that you want people to know about?
I think that there is a a really clear line out there that some people believe climate change and climate justice only relates to specifically environmental things like recycling or just like our lakes or the ground. But in reality, it affects the most important thing is that the climate crisis affects real people, and it's affecting real people today. And that's why we have to realize that the climate crisis is an intersectional issue rather than just specifically an environmental issue. So like we have to think about racism and how, like I was talking about before, environmental racism and how it affects those, or like immigrant issues with climate refugees and displacement, or like how Eleanor was talking about people with disabilities and the intersectionalities between the climate crisis and that. Yeah.
I think it's just like any other issue in that it's going to impact the people who are already marginalized by society the most, whether it be COVID, the climate crisis, whatever. We will always see Black people, people of color, working class people, disabled people, queer people being the people most impacted by any crisis.
I don't have anything to add. Isabelle and Eleanor did a great job.
All right, cool. What's some advice you would pass on to other youth who are interested in getting into environment?
I'd say start local. I think that's honestly the biggest thing that we overlook is I think a lot of times when you get involved, you'll start to feel this pressure that, oh my God, it's this global problem, so I need to be working globally. But I think, and it's a cheesy thing that I feel like I hear a lot of people say, but like act locally and you're gonna make more change because you know your community and that's where you are the expert and where you have the most influence. So you should start there, and it may look like your community may be the people on the front lines of the climate crisis, or your community may be the people causing the climate crisis. And either way, you need to be looking at that and saying, how can I be doing this? Whether it be creating community gardens to like get more healthy and like sustainable food in your communities, or if it is like trying like protesting in front of a corporation in your community that is doing terrible things and shutting down their office building for a day or something like that. It's all very valuable and work in your community.
I guess my advice would just be to be inclusive in your work, especially with climate justice work or like environmentalist work. There are a lot of white voices that are being amplified, and you know, it's great to be talking about the issue, but making sure that you're working with people who are actually more impacted by climate change, instead of just talking about, you know, all of these groups are talking for them. Make sure that you're amplifying Black and Indigenous voices in any space, specifically spaces of climate justice.
I think one thing is that we have to move away from social media activism. And I know it's really hard since we're in a pandemic right now, but I think that like even when we weren't, and back then in like say September 20th, 2019, people were doing a lot of things for clout and just like going to protests so that they could take pictures and forgetting the real reason of like why these protests are happening, and just to like prove like, hey, I'm doing something. It's not enough. You actually have to like do stuff. You have to like, and I think that's another thing. You also have to provide action steps if you are trying to spread awareness, because spreading awareness can only do so much.
All right. That's awesome. What's the campaign you're working on? And yeah, just start with.
I can go. Um, I am currently working on equitable education in my school district. So we are currently trying to get our school district to agree to, they've already agreed, but holding them accountable to 11 anti-racist imperatives, as well as LGBT issue, as well as like we've since incorporated some LGBT and disabled rights policies on top of that. Specifically around like 504s and gender neutral restrooms, like pronoun use, things like that. And we've been trying to pressure our school district as well as working within the community.
I'm currently working on turning my city into a sanctuary city. I live in Apple Valley, and one of the core issues, like I talked about earlier, was displacement of people. And having a sanctuary city is basically cutting off ties with ICE so that the city and the town is just a more welcoming space for refugees and immigrants as a whole. Yeah, so I'm just specifically on the issue of climate refugees, trying to spread awareness for that issue and also actively turn my city into a sanctuary city. I will be hoping to present to City Hall at the end of April. Yeah.
I started a group called 197 Students for Change this summer in my school district, and we had 5 days of demands regarding anti-racist and just anti-prejudice stuff in general. And so with that group, I was trying to implement an ethnic studies course and then ethnic studies language throughout all courses in my high school. But currently it's at a temporary or not temporary pause because there were a lot of internal issues, and it's really hard to work with adults who don't respect children and don't listen to us and think that we're just messing around when we're really very serious. And so it was just not going well. It was really hard on all of our mental health. So right now we are taking a break to take care of ourselves. And yeah, that's, in my opinion, just as important as doing anti-racist or any work in your community.
Okay, and continuing on the topic of campaign, one thing you've done with your campaign that you're proud of.
I'd say overall, my campaign has gotten my community talking about issues related to race and LGBT rights and disability rights, because before it has always been a very like taboo, like we're perfect here. We don't have any issues. Don't talk about it. And I think we've really opened up a dialogue. And although we haven't seen a ton of like substantial changes yet, I think that we've really seen a culture shift and people being more open, and people sharing the things they've experienced within the district. And I think that's been really powerful to see, is that this is a conversation that's starting to happen. And so I'm definitely pretty proud of that.
I think for me, I definitely agree with Eleanor because our campaigns are similar, and it was really wonderful to see people talking. But of course, the most important part of any campaign or anything is the action pieces that come with it. And so I was really proud to see that my district did implement some of the changes that we requested or demanded. And I don't know, I think that it's really cool to see things actually change and see things that negatively impacted people in my life in that school be changed. So I'm pretty proud of that.
I would say that I'm proud of like the stories that I was able to hear, and hopefully I will be able to amplify them soon. I talked to this one refugee from Cambodia, and she was able to talk about some really hard stuff that happened within her own life that she hadn't been able to talk about before. And I think that was a really strong moment that I am proud to have happened and have allowed her to get something off of her chest.
And I'm really hopeful that my campaign will make it to the place Nayana's is at, where we'll have seen action change, because we're still really on our school board, and hopefully we'll see some real changes beyond just promises soon.
Thank you for sharing, all of you. That was amazing. Let's see. What has been a challenge in your?
I can start. So right now it's kind of hard to implement action steps because what is it called? Because all the political people in power, all the positions of power are like in a flux right now. Since Apple Valley, our mayor just left, and so now we have a new mayor, and I think that there was an election. I don't know. There was some really complicated stuff. I'm not really up to date on the city stuff. It's kind of weird. But I plan to just go forward and ignore all the other politic aspects and just go through and try to have them hear my message. Yeah.
I think for me and the group that I was working with, the hardest part, like I was saying earlier, was working with the people in power. Because for my specific school district, there's a lot of talk and there has been some action, but it took a long time, and we've been doing the same thing for 3 years, and just getting people to actually take us seriously and not gaslight us in every meeting. It took a while, and it was really hard, and there were definitely points where we did not want to continue. So
yeah, and I think for my campaign and our whole organization in general, we've really been struggling with the pushback we get, especially student wise, because we are a group of like parents, students, and alumni, but the students have gotten a lot of hate and stuff for the work they're doing, and it's been very difficult, I think, for all of us, because I think we all have just kind of tried to fly under the radar as much at school as we can, because that's kind of just at some point, some way, the way to survive, like with the issues that are happening. And then when you bring up these sensitive issues and you're all of a sudden like asking forcing the school district to be anti-racist, or forcing them to be like vocal, and you're very vocal about LGBT rights, like then that puts a target on your back. And I think that's been very difficult for all of us, is to now be that like center of attention that people are like putting a lot of focus onto and a lot of negative energy.
Um, Following up on that, that was a really good point. What would you recommend for people who are putting themselves out there but feel insecure about it, or feel nervous about the amount of tension they would be getting or they are getting? What did you?
I would say find a community. That's the reason that I've been able to keep going. It's the reason that I think it's sustainable, is because you find other people who agree with you and who are doing the same thing as you and support you. And I think it's one of the most valuable things. And like Nayana and their group are doing, they're currently taking a mental health, like time for their mental health. And I think that's also important, is realizing that you don't hold the whole world on your shoulders. It's not all your responsibility, and that you need to take care of yourself and take care of your community. And that's going to be really important. And so between like taking breaks and having that community to support you, I think those are two of the most important things you can do and will help you get through a lot.
I think also another thing is don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, I know that, especially if this is this advice is specifically for youth organizers, like, you're young. Like, I know the whole point of like everything is you're young. Your voice is not heard a lot. But don't be afraid to ask for help from people that have had more experience, especially adults. Like, having Akira as a mentor was one of the most helpful things throughout this whole journey. And like, just the connections that you'll be able to get from those adults, they've already established stuff because they have that experience. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, those are all really good points. The only thing that I would have to add is like, be confident in what you're advocating for and remember why you started and all of the people that support you, because I think a lot of times it's easy to feel helpless, but you have to remember that a lot of people who are making the decisions that you like for taking action on things that you're proposing are people who work for you, whether it's in your school district or in your city. They work for you and you need to remind them of that. So stay confident in your cause and have that team that will support you, like Eleanor was saying.
All right, what's one maybe more simple thing that you wish everyone would do or take into consideration in relation to climate change or social justice?
I think one thing that I would want people to do is kind of what I talked about earlier about performative activism, and try to actually walk the talk in, whether it's in daily life or through action steps, and actually doing what you're talking about, and also calling out people and helping them learn so that they can be better as well.
I can go. I guess I'm just going to kind of tie it back to what I was talking about more in the beginning, and that's just disability activism and disability rights. Because I think that one thing in our movement spaces that makes them very inaccessible for people with disabilities is the constant pressure we put on productivity and what you're able to produce for the movement. And I think that one, that's like a very capitalist thing that doesn't belong in our movement spaces. And two, it's very ableist because oftentimes disabled people aren't able to produce the most stuff that's like consumable, like, because it's difficult to say what productivity is, and oftentimes taking time for your mental health, taking time for your physical health is better for your movement than it would be to push yourself to attend that one more call. But oftentimes I feel like it's very difficult to say you need a setback or that you're unable to do something. I think we put a lot of pressure within our movement spaces to do as much as you can and to pressure results. And I think that is something we need to push away from, because when we're pressuring people within our own organization for like the top result, it's not going to be a safe space for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I can't really think of anything in addition to that, but I guess like Isabelle was saying, take action. Like, words can only do so much, but along with that action, you should be educated and all of your work should be intersectional and inclusive. And just make sure that your work is what you would want to be involved in if someone else is doing it, or you'd like the ideal picture. Obviously, you're not going to be perfect, but take time to reflect on what you're doing, and I think you'll maybe find that there's something that you want to change, or that would make your movement more inclusive. So just constantly kind of reflecting on what you're doing will probably make things easier for you.
All right, we're almost out of time because this ends at 5:45. So maybe, gosh, this isn't necessarily a quick question, but for a final sort of ask, what's one thing you've learned from your experience with like organizing in the campaigns program that you think is like the most important?
I would say the most important thing that I've learned from doing this campaign is probably the importance of like talking to people, because although that's basically all that I've done so far, I've learned so much. And although like I was talking earlier about the importance of action and actively doing stuff, like the stuff that you learn from simply just talking to people is something that you can actively put into your life. And like that's an important step. Like conversations, that type of little activism are important to have.
For me, I think the most important thing that I've learned is that I am very powerful, and not just me, but all of us are, and we can make a lot of difference if we put our minds to it. And there's just so many things that we can do, and we shouldn't underestimate ourselves because just one person can start so much. So.
I think something that I've learned that's really helped me has been the power of reflection and taking a step back and looking at what you've done. Because I think oftentimes we finish something, we accomplish something, and then it's instantly the next thing. And we haven't looked back and celebrated what we've done, or even if we haven't done much, but and I feel like a lot of times you'll get to like kind of like quiet place in activism where you're planning things or you're working on things, but nothing big has happened. You don't feel like you've made a ton of change. And then so you start to feel almost like burnt out, like I've been doing all this work, but nothing's happened. But I think it's good to look back and reflect on, I've been doing all this work, like I'm still out here doing something, and you can still see that this work will amount to something. Where like it's just not at the stage where I see the visual results. And I think as well as thinking back on how this work has made me feel with my mental health and stuff has helped me take the space I need and realize and like kind of change to make activism a more sustainable thing for me.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to all of you. We are almost out of time, so I don't know if Akira wants to say anything, but otherwise I think that's the end of this workshop. But thank you for answering all of the questions.